She told me she was going to a business dinner, with the calm of someone who had lied before and not been caught. But this time, there was something in her tone of voice, in the way she styled her hair, in her choice of dress, a dress she never wore to meetings. There was something in her eyes, or the lack thereof, that made my suspicion grow silently. I didn't argue, I didn't question her. I just smiled, wished her a good night, and went to find her. The restaurant was too expensive for a Tuesday night, the wine was already on the table before the order was even placed, the candlelight didn't suit contracts or spreadsheets. When I entered and saw the two of them laughing, their hands almost touching on the table, I understood what she had come to sign there. A new chapter, far from me. And when she saw me, her eyes didn't deny anything. She was desperate, as if the undoing of the lie hurt more than the act itself. I got up from the next table, faced them both, and simply said, "Business closed." And I left. I left with the bitterness of the end etched in my heart, but with my dignity intact. In the following days, she tried to explain herself. She sent messages, tried to reappear, said it wasn't what I thought, that things were confusing, that the dinner meant nothing. But her words seemed insignificant compared to the image of the two of them smiling together. She said she still loved me, that it had been a mistake. But there is no mistake when there is intention. And there is no love when there is betrayal. The man for whom she destroyed everything, the one who made her think she had found something greater than what we built, he didn't want commitment. Just when she thought she would change her life, she discovered it was just another fling for him. And then, alone, she realized she had traded a home for a mistake. But what she never expected, and perhaps will never admit, is that that ending transformed me. At first, it hurt like hell. Living with the absence of someone who is still alive, someone who chose to leave even while being by your side, is a pain that can't be cured. Waking up and no longer smelling the coffee she made, not hearing her dragging footsteps in the kitchen, the sound of the hairdryer, her laughter on the phone with her mother. All of that became a glaring absence. It was like walking through a museum of memories where all the artworks were torn. I tried to keep myself busy, but nothing occupied me. I tried to hate, but hate is a prison as cruel as unresolved love. The truth is, it took me a while to understand that I didn't need revenge, or to win her back, or to prove anything. I just needed to move on. And I kept going. Slowly, stumbling, but I kept going. I met someone when I didn't even want to meet anyone anymore. It wasn't on an app, or at a party. It was in a simple, casual, almost silent situation. But the difference between being with someone who chooses to be with you every day and someone who pretends is so great that my soul seemed to breathe again. For the first time in months, I felt peace. It was a peace without promises, without games, without secrets. The way she looked at me, how she listened to me, how she didn't try to fix anything in me, just accepted me, that was what I always wanted and never knew how to ask for. Meanwhile, she reappeared. Days later, weeks, months perhaps. She appeared with tears in her eyes, but not from the rain. She said she had made a mistake, that she had lost her way, that she had believed a lie that only seemed to be love. She asked for forgiveness. I listened. With respect, calmly. Because there was no longer anger, only understanding. I forgave her, because I needed that for myself, not for her. But to start over? No. What is broken by choice cannot be glued back together by regret. And that's when everything was reversed. She was left with the emptiness. And I, with peace. She was left with the memories of what she destroyed, with the remnants of a love she threw away thinking she would find something better. I, with the certainty that my worth doesn't depend on the gaze of those who didn't know how to see me. She started walking the streets hoping to see me, hoping for a sign, a word, anything. But I wasn't the same anymore. And neither was she. But while I changed to live, she changed to survive what she caused. What she never told me, but I knew, was that, some time later, she saw me in a square, sitting on a bench holding hands with the woman who was now beside me. She watched from afar, hidden, seeing the smiles that had once been hers. She watched as the woman's child ran up and hugged me, and I stood up, picked up the boy, and spun him in the air while he laughed with that purity that only little ones possess. That's when it hit me. She hadn't just lost a love. She had lost the chance to have the life she wanted. She realized, right there, without anyone needing to say anything, that I had become the man of another family. That the future she had destroyed for a night of ego and fantasy was now my past. And that I would never look back again. She could try, she could cry, she could beg. But there's no going back for those who chose to leave. And the silence I left as an answer hurt more than any scream. She wanted to rebuild, but the land already had another owner, peace. The curious thing is that everything could have been different. All it took was a choice. All it took was a conversation. All it took was the truth. But she chose the sweeter lie instead of the bitter truth. And in the end, the lie exacted its price. High, cold, irrecoverable. But what really happened the moment she tried to come back? What was the encounter like between the one who betrayed and the one who survived the betrayal? Did she really try to win me back, or could she just not bear the thought of seeing me happy? And who is this new woman who entered my life uninvited and became everything the other one never was? There are details in this story that even she doesn't know. There are truths that only those who have been betrayed understand. And there are endings that only those who have lost everything can live with in peace. Welcome to the channel. Here, we never romanticize or support any kind of betrayal. The stories told are fiction, but the feelings are real, and they serve to show how a wrong choice can destroy homes, hearts, and entire futures. May each story serve as a warning, not an inspiration. Get ready, what you're about to hear is deeply shocking. Let the story begin. Michael and Emily met on a cloudy September afternoon when she hurried into the bookstore where he worked, fleeing a light drizzle that heralded the end of summer. She wore a light coat, her eyes attentive, her expression restless, as if seeking shelter not only from the rain, but from something deeper. He, with the tranquility of someone who had learned to observe the world in silence, simply smiled and offered her a coffee from the thermos he kept behind the counter. She accepted with a brief smile and stayed there for almost 2 hours, pretending to browse books while, in reality, allowing herself, for the first time in a long time, to slow down. It was a simple encounter, without promises, without exaggeration. But in that simplicity, something was planted. A small gesture. A safe space. And in that space, something began to grow. Michael was the kind of man who learned to care in silence. He was never one for grand speeches, but he was always where he was needed, by a friend's side during a difficult time, bringing soup to an elderly neighbor, fixing things that weren't even his, but that bothered him because they were broken. He was observant, patient, possessing a calmness that was often mistaken for disinterest, but which, in reality, was contained strength. He had experienced some loves before Emily, but none that had lasted. With her, it was different from the beginning, not because of the intensity, but because of the lightness. What enchanted him most was the way she made him laugh effortlessly, the way she saw poetry in mundane things, as if she had a gift for transforming routine into something worthy of being remembered. Emily had that gift, to bring color to gray hours, to make a simple Sunday seem like a good movie. Emily came from a troubled past, a previous relationship that left her with some internal cracks. She was someone who was afraid of losing herself in others, and so, sometimes, she protected herself with a certain distance. But with Michael, there was something different. Perhaps the absence of demands, perhaps the way he looked at her without demanding edited versions of herself. With him, she didn't need to hide her silences, nor justify her tears. And it was in this space of acceptance that she began, little by little, to lower her guard. It wasn't an explosive love. It was a patient love, built on afternoons of laughter, simple dinners cooked together, conversations about books, old movies, and plans that were drawn up without haste. A love with roots, the kind that grow beneath the skin. Over time, they shared a small apartment, then a larger house, full of windows and plants. Emily enjoyed tending to the garden flowers and painting the walls from time to time, as if coloring the environment was a way to keep everything alive. Michael, in turn, dedicated himself to working with books, later becoming a literature teacher at a local school. He liked to talk about the classics, but mainly about stories of ordinary people, as if, deep down, he believed that the greatest tragedies and beauties resided in seemingly normal lives. In the eyes of others, they were the perfect couple, not because they lived a life of appearances, but because there was something genuine in the way they looked at each other. They didn't need to say much to understand each other. They had an intimacy that came from sincere companionship, from real coexistence, from knowing where to keep each other's pain. But, as in every true story, there were layers. Emily began to explore new career paths. She was an ambitious, creative woman, full of ideas and desires. She joined a large company, where she began to lead projects, meet new people, and where everything seemed to move too fast. Michael supported her in everything, even when their schedules began to clash, even when weekends became filled with meetings, events, and trips. He understood, or at least tried to understand, that this new phase was important for her, and that sometimes love also required space. Even with the growing longing, even with the nights becoming quieter, he stayed there. He trusted her. He always trusted her. And she knew it. In the few hours they shared, there was still affection. Small gestures, impromptu dinners, movies watched with their feet intertwined on the sofa. But, little by little, something began to shift. Small distractions, justified absences, glances that would wander. Michael sensed it, but didn't pressure her. He believed it was all a phase, that the love they had would withstand any turbulence. Perhaps that's why he didn't ask too many questions, nor create scenes. He simply waited. It was his way of loving, with patience, with trust, with surrender. Emily, on the other hand, began to live on two frequencies. Part of her still remembered the first time she tasted coffee at the bookstore, the security of being in his arms after a difficult day, the lightness of carefree Sundays. But there was another part that felt suffocated by predictability, drawn to novelty, to the feeling of being seen differently, by another gaze. Not that I had stopped loving. But love sometimes doesn't shout. And the desire for something new can make a confused heart believe that something is missing, when in reality it's just a passing noise. She didn't know exactly when she started to lose herself, maybe it was at one of those company dinners, or in the more personal conversations with those she shouldn't have crossed the line with. But it started. And once you cross a certain line, it's difficult to return with clean feet. Still, there were days when everything seemed as before. They laughed together, looked at each other tenderly, shared plans. Emily, even though conflicted, still found in his embrace a kind of calm that no one else offered. And that tore her apart inside. It was as if two versions of her were fighting silently. One that wanted to stay and rebuild, and another that wanted to run away before it was too late. Michael, unaware of the storm brewing inside her, continued to believe. He made simple surprises, wrote down phrases from books that reminded them of each other, prepared dinners on days when she said she was too tired. He demanded nothing. He was simply there. And that was, perhaps, his greatest strength, and his greatest vulnerability. The world around them kept spinning, as it always does when the dramas are internal. Friends thought they were fine. Family only noticed the smiles and the photos. No one knew what was happening in the silence of the room, in the disguised absences, in the increasingly shorter glances. But the truth is that, inside, they were beginning to walk in opposite directions, even while still sharing the same bed. Love, when not nurtured by both hands, begins to wither slowly. And this process hurts more than an abrupt breakup. It's a death in installments, where each day takes a piece. Even so, something held them together. Perhaps habit, perhaps affection, perhaps hope. Michael continued to believe that everything would work out, that it was just a phase. Emily pretended to believe it because she didn't have the courage to confront what she felt. It was as if they were both dancing on a glass floor, not knowing which step would break everything. And in this rhythm, the days went by. Until, one night, a simple phrase, said too naturally, ignited something in Michael. It wasn't jealousy, nor immediate distrust. It was just discomfort. A different kind of silence between words. A gap that shouldn't be there. And it remained. Like an invisible splinter, like a warning that the heart feels before reason understands. But even faced with this silent suspicion, he continued. Not out of naivete, but out of love. He believed that the truth, whatever it might be, would come to light. And when it did, he would know what to do. Until then, he remained who he always was, the man who extends a hand even when the other person is no longer holding it. The man who cares, even without knowing if he is still being cared for. The man who loves, even with his heart whispering that something is about to break. It was night when Michael parked his car across the street from the restaurant she had mentioned with too nonchalance. A business dinner, she'd said, smiling hastily as she adjusted herself in front of the mirror and applied the red lipstick she rarely wore. He didn't want to suspect anything, but something deep in his chest had drawn him there. It wasn't jealousy, nor insecurity. It was a cold, sharp intuition, as if his body knew before his mind that something was about to crumble. Sitting in the car, with the headlights off, he watched people go in and out of the restaurant. When she appeared on the sidewalk, alone, walking briskly, it felt like a punch to the gut. The dark blue dress, the heels he knew she hated wearing to work engagements, the way she looked around, as if waiting for someone. And then he appeared. The man. The boss. Tailored suit, smiling expression, too confident for it to be just a professional relationship. They greeted each other with a hug too intimate to be casual. They went inside together. Michael slowly got out of the car. His hands were cold, his heart racing, as if everything in his body was fighting against the idea of seeing with his own eyes what he already knew. He entered the restaurant through another door, sat at a table further away, almost hidden by the ornamental plants. He observed. She was laughing. He held her hand between sips of wine. There were no folders, no notebooks, no documents. Only glances, whispered words, and gestures that left no doubt. It was a meeting. It was betrayal. And everything he felt at that moment couldn't be contained in any name. She saw him first. Her eyes, upon meeting his, went blank for a second. Then, despair. As if the mask had fallen prematurely. The man in front of her, bewildered, looked back, then at her. Michael calmly stood up, went to the table, faced them both and said simply, "Business is closed." And he left. There were no screams, no scene. Just a short, precise, definitive sentence. Pain didn't need witnesses. In the days that followed, Emily tried to recover what had already slipped through her fingers. She sent long messages, tried to explain, called in the middle of the night. She said she had been confused, that the other man meant nothing, that it was just a passing mistake. But Michael didn't answer. Her words no longer had the same sound. He read them as if he were reading a forgotten language, unable to feel anything but exhaustion. He didn't want revenge, he didn't want explanations. He wanted distance. He wanted to start over. And, however contradictory it seemed, this hurt her more than it hurt him. Michael quietly rebuilt his routine. He started going out more, accepted invitations from friends, and returned to the bookstore where it had all begun. He wasn't looking for anyone, but life sometimes decides for us. And it was there that he met someone new. Someone who didn't come to heal, but to add to his life. A sweet woman with a tranquil smile, who brought peace instead of euphoria. There was no immediate enchantment, but there was something in the way she listened, in the way she spoke little and touched with care, that gradually opened a space in his heart. And he let her. Not out of neediness, not out of revenge, but because he felt there was truth there. And truth, after so much lying, is too rare a gift to be refused. Meanwhile, Emily sank into an emptiness she couldn't name. The other man, the one for whom she had traded everything, no longer answered her messages. He said he didn't want to get involved, that he couldn't continue what they had started. She persisted. He became increasingly distant. Little by little, she understood that there was no love, no promise, no future. It was only desire, fueled by the adrenaline of the forbidden. And when it ceased to be forbidden, it also ceased to be interesting. He didn't want to share his life with her. He only used her to fill his ego. And she allowed it. But now, it was too late. Emily tried to rebuild bridges. She sent long emails, showed up at the school where Michael worked, called mutual friends. The response was always silence or the delicacy of a refusal. Michael had moved on. With someone else. With a different energy. She found out by chance. She saw a photo. Then she saw another. Then she saw him in person, in a coffee shop, with his new wife. They were holding hands. He was laughing like he hadn't laughed with her in a long time. His expression was light, free. And that hurt more than any rejection. It hurt because he was happy. Truly happy. And without her. Months passed. Emily, lost between regrets and memories, began to visit places where they had been together, as if that could salvage something of what she had lost. One day, walking aimlessly, she entered a park they used to frequent. It was late afternoon, the sky painted orange, and she sat on a bench, watching the families around her, the couples holding hands, the children running. That's when she saw him. From afar. Michael was there, sitting on a bench further on, with his new wife beside him. The two were talking while a child played in the grass. A small, smiling boy, who in a few seconds ran towards Michael, who stood up and picked him up naturally, as if he were his own. He spun the boy in the air while laughing. The woman approached, hugged them both. It was a simple scene. But Emily, seeing it from afar, felt the impact of an earthquake. She placed her hand on her chest. She gasped for air. There, before her, lay everything she had impulsively destroyed. A home. A caring man. A future that could have been hers. And now it belonged to another. A woman who probably never betrayed him. Who perhaps never even told a single lie. She stood there, watching. Waiting for him to see her. To say something. To perhaps remember. But Michael didn't see her. Or he saw her and chose not to react. Because there was nothing more to be said. Their story no longer existed. And she, who had once been everything, was now just a specter of the past. As she left the park, staggering through her thoughts, Emily felt the most real pain of her entire life. The pain of seeing what she had lost because of a fantasy. The price of betrayal wasn't just the loss of the man who loved her. It was the loss of respect, peace, future, home. Regret brought no solace. It brought a mirror. And the reflection wasn't pretty. On the other side, Michael, now with a different life, carried no resentment. Only memories. Some good, others not so much. But what strengthened him most was the certainty that he hadn't lost anything. He had been freed. Because sometimes, the greatest blessing lies precisely in what ends. Because what is built with truth never competes with what is built on lies. And he knew this. He knew because, that late afternoon, with the boy in his arms and tranquil love beside him, he felt whole for the first time in a long time. Without loose ends. Without open wounds. Just at peace. And that was the difference. While she was left with emptiness, he was left with peace. And that, in the end, was the true happy ending. Time went on as it always does for everyone, relentless, silent, and with a cruel way of showing what was truly a choice and what was a consequence. Emily, now alone, lived between frustrated attempts to reclaim a past that no longer existed and the weight of knowing that, through a thoughtless decision, she had set fire to the only bridge that truly led to somewhere safe. For months, she nurtured the silent hope that Michael, at some point, would look back. That he would see in her a sign of sincere remorse and, perhaps, offer her a second chance. But time, when misused, offers no return. It scars those who move on and punishes those who wait. And for her, there were no miracles. People around her began to subtly distance themselves. Mutual friends preferred silence, avoiding involvement, taking sides without speaking. Michael's parents, who once called her their daughter, began responding to her messages with curt phrases, until they stopped responding altogether. Her world, once full of affection and belonging, became small, silent, strange. The places she frequented with him began to hurt. The photos she didn't have the courage to delete seemed to mock her own memory. And the nights, once shared with affection and laughter, became long, cold, and filled with memories that offered no comfort. There were days when he tried to rebuild himself. He went back to school, risked moving to a new city, tried to start over practically. But everything felt forced. Nothing had any meaning. Because the emptiness that remained wasn't from the absence of a man, but from the absence of herself. Emily stopped recognizing herself. She tried new relationships, but no one could reach the depth she knew she had experienced with Michael. And, little by little, she understood that there are mistakes that can't be corrected with apologies, nor with good intentions. There are mistakes that only time carries away, while reminding us, every day, of what was lost. Michael, on the other hand, matured like someone who weathers a storm and finds solid ground on the other side. Not that it was easy. There was pain, emotional relapses, nights when the silence screamed louder than any memory. But he didn't look back. He rebuilt himself with patience and discernment. The woman he met after everything wasn't perfect, but she was genuine. And that was enough. Together, they built a solid relationship, made of conscious choices, mutual respect, and small gestures that, when added together, created something powerful. The boy, her son from another marriage, ended up becoming a part of him too. Little by little, without forcing it, he won the child's affection, who began to see him as a reference point, as a safe haven. And Michael, who once had his love ripped away from him, now received it head-on, without fear, without doubt. There was no dramatic reunion, nor a final conversation between the two. There was only time. And time, with its cruel wisdom, made sure to show each of them the place they chose to occupy. Emily became the woman who lost everything for believing in an illusion. Michael became the man who gained everything by remaining true to himself, even when everything around him crumbled. He didn't seek revenge, he didn't wish ill. He simply moved on. And moving on, in this case, was the most silent and definitive blow. Gradually, Emily realized that it wasn't the days that hurt the most, but the details. A song playing on the radio that reminded her of a moment. A scent wafting from the street. A couple exchanging laughs in a coffee shop. A book left open on the shelf. The little things were the cruelest. Because they show us that true love isn't made of grand gestures, but of the sum of everything that only exists when there is complicity. And she, for not having valued that, now watched from afar a story that could have been hers, but which was now nothing more than a window closed forever. Michael's wedding to his new partner took place in a small, intimate ceremony, just for their closest friends and family. There was no luxury, no ostentation. There was truth. The boy, with a shy smile, held the rings. And when he placed them in Michael's hands, their eyes met with the certainty that everything worthwhile is built on a solid foundation. In that instant, the past ceased to matter. The present, with its honest simplicity, was all that mattered. Years later, they crossed paths by chance in a bookstore. The same one where they had met. Emily was alone, browsing through worn-covered books. Michael entered with the boy, now grown up. Their eyes met, and she tried to smile. He responded politely, but there was an insurmountable distance in his eyes. There was no hatred, no resentment. There was only indifference. And perhaps that was the cruelest moment of all for her. Knowing that she no longer caused pain, nor left a memory. That she had ceased to be anything. Emily left with tears in her eyes. Not because of the memory of him, but because of everything that had ceased to be. Because of everything she had lost due to a choice that seemed small, but which proved to be definitive. And in that instant, she understood that, no matter how much she tried to reinvent herself, regret would follow her like a shadow. Not as punishment, but as a consequence. Michael, for his part, left with the boy, smiling as he heard a silly joke. They got in the car, put on some random music, and drove home. Life was peaceful, simple, and fulfilling. And he knew he didn't need anything more. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Because the true victory was having rebuilt a clean life, without hurting anyone. And, above all, having maintained his own essence, even when the world tried to break him. Comment below what you thought of this story. What was the most striking part for you? Would you have forgiven? Have you ever experienced something similar? Your opinion matters and we want to know. And if you're not already subscribed, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any stories like this. Every week, a new narrative capable of moving, surprising, and, above all, making you think. This story teaches us that betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships. It destroys trust, destroys identity, destroys entire homes, and often leaves scars that time cannot erase. Momentary desire, an inflated ego, or the search for something new may seem justified at the time, but the consequences arrive, and there isn't always room for regret. The channel makes it clear, here, we do not support any type of betrayal, that we tell stories like this to show the real effects of thoughtless choices and the importance of respecting those who truly love us. Until the next story. And remember, true love doesn't need to be tested. It needs to be nurtured.